So it's been of interest to some people that we know, friends and family, on how we store our food. So I'm making a record for their benefit and anyone else who's interested in how we put up vegetables, meats and fruits. So this is Swede. What I'm doing is cutting it into 1¼ inch sections or 1 inch sections. It's quite rough, as you can see. It's not really any hard and fast rule on this. Then I run a knife around the outside to peel it and then dice it into cubes. So the cubes are between 1 and 1½ inches. Again, it's just got to be able to fit inside the jar. So we like diced Swede. I then dump it all in a bowl. I then get on with the process of salting my clean jars. So they are clean. It's ½ teaspoon of salt, and then I start boiling some water. When the water's boiled, I like to turn it down and then start the blanching process. So I've got a boiling pot and 2 kettles on low. I then blanch them for 5 minutes in the boiling water. When that's done, I take the hot Swede straight out. You'll notice there's a colour change, and dump it straight into the pint jars. So we like to pack these in as tight as we can, get as much in as possible, and leave 1 inch of headspace on the top of the jars. It's important to do hot with hot, so the jars are clean, they are warm, and the Swede is also warm. So then, like I say, pack it in, then pour in the warm water, so it's not boiling, it's been kept hot, but we pour that straight on top and leave a 1 inch headspace. It's important to make sure that your pieces are even, and then it's equally as important to make sure that there are no bubbles sat behind. Cubes like to collect bubbles, they're not the worst for it, but pouring the liquid in slow does help, and it alleviates some of that issue, but you've got to make sure that you're thorough with it. So we warm the lids up in a saucepan, and we have the water on a rolling boil. Then we place the warm lids on top of the jars, and once all of the jars have got a lid on, we then put a ring to secure those. So this is quite a long process, and the benefits of it for us is we can get some really good deals on bulk veg from grocers, and where fresh vegetables would then be lost, they will keep for a significantly longer period of time. What I'm doing now is applying the rings. I'm screwing them on loosely. I'm a bit heavy-handed, so I'm told, so it's always best to get the good lady to tighten these up to where they need to be, because they're just past the nip point on the thread. Once that's done, then set up the pot. So remove the lid. In the background, I've checked the lid to make sure that the vents are clear and the lock mechanism functions. The seal's already good, I've checked that, and the safety is also good. I've removed one of the separators that comes in it. I'm adding distilled vinegar. This is because we live in a hard water area and we get chalking on the glass of the jars. I'm adding hot water. The product is hot. The jars are hot, so we have to put it into hot water. Interestingly, there are 3 marks on this pot. We use the bottom mark for what we're about to do. Then place the jars inside the pot. We can get 9 pint jars on the bottom, so that's 8 around the edge, 4 each half, and then 1 in the center. Which feels like there's an extra bit of room in the center there that could probably be utilized for something, but you always want to cram it in. We then add the spacer. It's not one that came with the pot. It's one that we've had to buy separate. Then place the other 9 pint jars in, and once it's loaded, I'll then refit the lid. So the way this works is that steam and pressure can get the jars to a high temperature, which means that they can kill more bacteria and reduce the risk of any sort of food poisoning. Have to make sure that the lid's secured tightly. Thankfully this particular one only will go on one way. Then allow it to heat up, and I'm looking for continuous steam. Once there's continuous steam, I wait for 10 minutes, and that's timed, and then place the weight on. The pressure then begins to build, and we wait till it hits 11. Once it hits 11, we then start the timer, in this particular instance for 30 minutes for Swede. You notice that the lock has popped up. It's quite an ingenious mechanism. It means that you cannot undo the lid whilst it is under pressure, and keeps it safe. So I guess one of the questions that's been asked that's worth answering at this point is, you know, what do you do next? Well, once you hit 30 minutes, you allow the pressure to drop. Once the gauge has hit 0, you can then remove the lid. Once the safety lock has dropped, it won't allow you to do it any other way. And then I'm taking the jars out and placing them on a towel to cool down further. I find that this speeds up the cooling down time, and given that we've got 55 pounds of Swede to process, we need the pots back. So I'm laying them out now, and what is interesting is this is the will they won't they stage in storing them in the jars. What you can see just on the left hand jar is some of the bubbles. We'll get some footage of that in a minute. So always a good sign I've found with the jars when you can see bubbles coming up. Now the most important thing is not to mess with these, so I've left them until the next day, and again just gently removing the rings. So I've been round and I've checked. You'll know when your jars are cooling down, they make an audible pop to show that they're sealing, and on the top of the lid you can press them down and there's no return on the jar. They are concaved. I then get a nice hot soapy sink full of water and give the jars a really good scrub. Sometimes you get a bit of siphoning, which is what you can see sort of staining on the lid. What's interesting about these lids is they seem to, some of them, stain in the canning process. I don't know if I'm putting too much vinegar in the water or if there's just a heat issue, but whenever we've popped the jars, it's not internally, it's always on the external coating. But the jars seem to be fine. So give them a good scrub, and like I say, this is the next day, so they're nice and cool and they come up quite well. If there's something that's particularly stubborn, I like to remove it. I use the sponge, you know, just the nylon pad on there, and use it very lightly to make sure we don't have any issues whatsoever. And then put the date on it. So write the date that it was put into the jar, so that we know, and then write on it what it is. I know it might seem a bit obvious that that's Swede. We put a lot of food into jars and we store it, and some things look very similar. So here's the bit you never see. This is me preparing the Swede quite badly, I might add. You know, it mashed really well. A massive knob of butter in there really helped it come along, and you know, give it a bit of extra oomph. Everything's better with butter. So here it is on some bangers and mash, and I have to tell you, it was absolutely handsome. So traditional English meal, or British meal should I say, enjoyed with a beer and some bread, loads of carbs. It was absolutely fantastic. Bangers, mash, gravy, Swede and green beans. Everything on that plate, with the exception of sausage, came out of a jar. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice day.